Serpentor, was he a great leader made from the DNA of some of the world's greatest conquerors? Or did he take the G.I. Joe franchise and throw it in the gutter? Coming up on the Big Retro Show. The 80s and 90s were great times to be a kid. Join me as I dive into the world of movies, music, video games and toys, and explore what made these decades so great. This is the Big Retro Show. Hey, what's up you guys? This is Los from the Big Retro Show, and in case you didn't know, I am a big fan of G.I. Joe. I grew up playing with the G.I. Joe toys, and I also loved watching the series and the subsequent movies that came out. So I was a big G.I. Joe fan. And one of the biggest things that happened to the world of G.I. Joe was the introduction of Serpentor. Now, Serpentor was a character created by Dr. Mindbender, and he was made from the DNA of all of the world's greatest conquerors. So Serpentor was made as the Emperor of Cobra, and that was a problem because Cobra already had a leader, and his name was Cobra Commander, obviously. So Cobra Commander was kind of like this character who was lovable and funny, and he was also very much ruthless as well. So when I first started doing this channel, I did an episode on the top G.I. Joe video games. It was basically a little history of all of the G.I. Joe video games. And that is when me and my friend, or my friend and I, Retro Crunch, started bantering back and forth about how Serpentor was both good and bad for the G.I. Joe franchise. And so here today, as a special guest, I have Scott from Retro Crunch to talk to you guys about why Serpentor really brought the G.I. Joe series down. So here's Scott.
Los, thanks man for having me on the Big Retro Show to talk a little bit about why I think Serpentor kind of sucks. So I grew up with the G.I. Joe Real American Hero and the DIC G.I. Joe, and nothing destroyed G.I. Joe for me as much as Serpentor did. Up until the second season of Real American Hero, I really did enjoy the back and forth battles and everything that happened between Cobra and G.I. Joe. I even really loved the comic book as well, which I thought did a good job of making the G.I. Joe universe not look so campy. But that second season of G.I. Joe, man, I think that it ruined some of the fandom with the introduction of Serpentor. I remember Mindbender, he originally being the brainchild to creating him, that jerk off, and later regretting the decision to even making him, which I liked.
Yes, Serpentor, right away. What a spoiled brat I have created.
I think Serpentor was pompous and arrogant, and he really wasn't a very effective leader. Maybe not even as good as Cobra Commander. I really hated his constant screaming and fit throwing, and of course the way he would constantly yell,
"This I command!"
It just got on my nerves. And as much as I kind of got aggravated with Cobra Commander at times, he was kind of this lovable bad guy that I enjoyed rooting against. Now I'm going to hit you with a couple statistics. Cobra Commander, he's been in 77 episodes in the first series. Serpentor, he was only in 19 in the second part of that series. And throughout the G.I. Joe history, Cobra Commander has always been more prominent, whether it be the comic books or the cartoons, and even the movies. Serpentor has always played second fiddle, and for a good reason. He's just not a character that people hate or love to hate. But I have to say that my two fondest memories of Serpentor is in the G.I. Joe movie where he gets his cape caught in the air chariot and he goes whizzing off into the sunset. That was pretty good, but by far the best was in the 1990 G.I. Joe series where Cobra Commander turns him into an iguana. Come on, you can't get any better than that. And aside that, I just really thought that the show took a pretty bad dive once he was introduced. Even though I did like a lot of the characters that were in that second season, I just don't think that he was one of them. The guy had a green and yellow costume, man. It was hideous looking, and it reminded me of the Green Bay Packers. Now, the Serpentor toy, I guess that was kind of decent, I suppose, but as soon as Hasbro didn't need the comic to advertise the Serpentor toy anymore, Larry Hama, he knew what to do with Serpentor. But alas, this is just one G.I. Joe fan's opinion on that god-awful abomination Serpentor. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Remember, it's better to tell the truth.
And that's no lie. Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe! Hey Scott, thanks so much for sharing your opinion about Serpentor and why he ruined the G.I. Joe franchise. See, my opinion is a little bit different, and I don't think he ruined the franchise at all. I thought that he added the needed boost that the series needed. I first learned about Serpentor from a commercial, but it wasn't a commercial for the toy or for the show. It was a commercial for the comic book. And on the cover of this comic book was two characters. It was Destro and Dr. Mindbender, and they were carrying the body of one of these great conquerors that they used later on to create Serpentor. When I finally got my eyes on Serpentor in the actual comic book and subsequently in the television show, I thought he was impressive. I mean, he looked like this big old snake. He had this big old snake head, and you know, he was a lot bigger than Cobra Commander. Now, a word about Cobra Commander. He was kind of like this skinny, kind of high-pitched voice guy who dressed in blue, and he had a mask on him, so you couldn't really tell if he was like angry or if he was happy, or you know, you couldn't even tell exactly what was going on behind that mask. But for years he faced off against G.I. Joe with no luck. You know, he was constantly screaming retreat and running away like a little bitch. And so, you know, the viewers knew this, and the viewers would count on G.I. Joe always beating Cobra, because, you know, in the cartoons, the good guys always win, right? And so we as viewers were just like, oh, you know what, there's Cobra Commander, he's gonna attack, G.I. Joe's gonna win, and we're all gonna feel good and learn something cool at the end of the episode. And, you know, we weren't the only ones to notice this, right? The troops, the Cobra troops, also knew this as well, and they had actually lost confidence in Cobra Commander. You know, they couldn't take him seriously. He didn't win anything. And so that's why they had to make Serpentor. And so what happened with that was that Dr. Mindbender had a dream one day, and he dreamt of the Emperor. He dreamt of Serpentor, and he knew what he had to do, and that was to steal the DNA of all the world's greatest conquerors. We got Genghis Khan, we got Napoleon Bonaparte, Alexander the Great. You know, at one point they tried to steal Sergeant Slaughter's DNA, but Sergeant Slaughter just bashed the container that contained his DNA, so Sergeant Slaughter is not the genetic makeup of Serpentor, but they mixed all of these DNAs together and created this sentient being who came out just in beast mode, like right away. He started kicking Sergeant Slaughter's ass. And if you know about Sergeant Slaughter, he's, you know, the real life wrestler Sergeant Slaughter. He was not anybody that you can toss around, but Serpentor, when he first arose, he was kicking his ass all over the place. And not only that, but he also asserted his dominance over Cobra Commander, who was basically just trying to tell Serpentor, yeah, you know what, you are just like the figurehead, but I'm going to be making the real decisions. And Serpentor was not having it. He was just like, nah, the first decision you'll make is where you want to get buried. And he just basically bitched Cobra Commander out. Now, I never really saw Cobra Commander as a leader. I always thought that he was just kind of like a leader in the same way that the Joker is a leader. The Joker is just kind of like this jokey character in the DC universe, very lethal, but you know, he's also kind of likable. He doesn't inspire any fear in anyone, certainly not Batman, and that was the way that Cobra Commander was. He was just kind of like this Eddie Haskell character. He was sly, and you know, he was known for getting his ass kicked by G.I. Joe, quite frankly. And so it was time for a change. It was time for a change. The other thing I want to talk about Serpentor wise, and I know that you talked about this a little bit too, and yes, you hated his look, but I actually liked it. He looked like a big old cobra, and it's just vicious. Everybody knows that the 80s was full of cobras, everything from Cobra Kai to Cobra, the Stallone movie, and I thought that he fit that theme very, very well. And when the toy came out, the toy was awesome. He came with this, you know, lavish chariot, and he had this cobra snake head on him, very much like the comics and the cartoons. And you were just like, yeah, man, this guy knows what's up. This guy is a real Cobra Commander, the real Cobra Emperor. And you know, not this little blue twerp that was running around kind of like yelling at people and giving orders. Now, grant you, Cobra Commander, as the years went by, he got a better look, right? My least favorite of all was the silver jetpack suit that he had. It was just kind of an abomination. I hated that. I hated it. I kind of liked the hood that they gave him. And I thought that that was a cooler look for him, because at least you can see his eyes. At least you can tell a lot from somebody's eyes to see if they're, you know, pissed off or not. But I thought that that was a cool addition to the Cobra Commander wardrobe. But he never did live up to the ferocity and the tenacity of Serpentor. Now, Scott, you mentioned that Serpentor, the whole thing with him saying, "This I command," was like really, really annoying. And yes, you know, it could be annoying when he said that, but I thought that it was more fearful than Cobra Commander's like constant whining and constant high-pitched voice. I thought that, you know, Serpentor's voice was just like, whenever you heard him say something, I was like, oh shit, I better just step my game up or else Serpentor's gonna beat the shit out of me. And so, you know, I thought that he commanded a lot more respect. And so, yeah, I mean, for these reasons, I think that Serpentor added the much needed shot in the arm to the G.I. Joe franchise. And, you know, just like you and I are, you know, not on the same page with Serpentor, the Cobra organization itself was never the same after Serpentor's birth, so to speak, because they were fractured. You know, there was a side that was loyal to Cobra Commander. There was a side that was loyal to Serpentor. Cobra Commander at many times tried to assassinate Serpentor, and as you mentioned, he turned him into a lizard. So you know what, I like to think that Cobra Commander was just like the biggest hater. He was a hater. No, I'm just kidding. I know he wasn't a hater, but you know what? I thought that the conflict, the inner conflict, was good. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we wanted Cobra to lose because we were all G.I. Joes. And yeah, but I can certainly relate to why you do not like Serpentor. He wasn't for everybody. He wasn't for everybody. And now I want to put the question to you guys. I want to know from you guys what your thoughts of Serpentor are. Was he good for the G.I. Joe franchise? Did you have the action figure? Did you like Serpentor? Was Cobra Commander a better leader? Yes, that is the question for you guys, and I want to see your answers to this question in the comments. Now, in case you don't already know about Retro Crunch, I highly advise you to go over to his page, subscribe to his channel, check out his videos, comment on his videos, like his videos, show him some love, guys. He is a channel that does a lot of retro content. He crunches all of that news together, everything from movies to toys to music to video games. He's the one that I get all of my retro updates from. And this is a channel that is one of my favorites. And so thank you, Scott, for being a guest on the Big Retro Show. Very much appreciated. I know you and I will never agree on the whole Serpentor thing, but hey, we don't have to. We don't have to, right? And until the next one, guys, I will see you on the Big Retro Show. Peace!